Okay, so our next speaker is Ellie McCabe. Ellie is a PhD student at the University of Kentucky, and she is going to talk about her research today on the interactions between spotted wing Drosophila and African fruit fly. So Ellie, go ahead and share your screen.
Okay, hi everyone. As mentioned, I am a PhD student in entomology. And I'm gonna talk to you about the two flies that I study, spotted wing Drosophila and African fig fly, and how those two come together in your berries. So if you've heard of either of these before, it has probably been the spotted wing Drosophila. The spotted wing Drosophila is an invasive Drosophila that invaded in 2008 and has since spread all around the country and is a really big pest of fruit. It's a really small fly, so Drosophila, you think like the fruit fly in your kitchen, so only about 2 to 3.5 millimeters. It has a solid brown body with solid black striping along the abdomen, so this lower part of the fly. The males are really identifiable because they have this spot at the end of their wings. The females are harder to identify though, but you can do so easily under a microscope when you look at their ovipositor, which is how they lay eggs. So that's down here and it's blown up on the screen here. And you can kind of see, it's not the clearest picture, but you can kind of see how this is toothed. And that's the serration. So in other fruit flies, that will be smooth and it's really distinguishable when you see it. So the damage is actually caused by that serrated ovipositor. So the females are able to lay eggs on ripe and underripe fruit that's still on the plant, unlike other fruit flies that are in your kitchen laying eggs on, rotting fruit. And when they lay the egg, you can see up here, here's a blueberry with an egg in it, and all you can see is the little filament, and then the rest of the egg is on the inside of the fruit. And once they hatch, the larva will live inside the fruit and eat your fruit. And then customers will take home fruit that already has larvae in it, which is not fun for everyone. And they attack a really large range of fruit. So, some of the most important ones in Kentucky are raspberries and blackberries. They also get blueberries, grapes, strawberries, cherries, any fruit with a really soft shell they are attacking. So I've been looking at the population dynamics of spotted wing Drosophila in Kentucky over the last 3 years. And what we found is that the populations really start growing in July, but they actually peak later in the summer, in the early fall, and also in the winter. So like in November, December even. So the fruit that is most vulnerable are the ones that are fruiting from like August to November. So like late fruiting raspberries and blackberries. And things earlier in the season, like strawberries and blueberries, aren't as attacked here in Kentucky. However, even though this graph looks like there's a lot of zeros in the months where we don't have a lot of them, we do still see small numbers all year round. So you always want to be looking out for this fly. The second fly I'm going to talk about is the African fig fly. So this is another invasive species. It actually invaded a little bit earlier in 2005. It's a little bit bigger than the spotted wing Drosophila. It's 3.5 milliliters. It has a lighter brown body, but it has these really distinguishable stripes that run down its thorax to its head. And actually, I think it's a really pretty fly. But the male and female both look basically exactly like this. And so this one gets its name African fig fly because it is a pest of figs. It's like a really bad pest of figs. The African fig fly does not have that serrated ovipositor that the spotted wing has, so it uses existing holes to infect fruit. And figs are pollinated by wasps that create a little hole, so they actually use that hole to get into the fruit and damage it. But since these two flies came together and have been invading America at about the same time, what we're seeing them emerge from the same fruit. And what we think is happening is we think that the African fig fly is following the spotted wing around, and after the spotted wing will lay an egg, it will go there afterwards and use that damage to lay its eggs afterwards. So here you can see a picture of a berry that I took where it's just covered in both species of the fly. So this is what we think is happening, but it hasn't really been studied very fully. So that's where I'm coming in. I'm looking at this relationship and trying to figure out what's going on. So this relationship can be really complicated, and there's a lot of different things that can affect it. First of all, the spotted wing itself can help the African fig fly get into new fruits, but also once they're both in there, they could be competing, for resources because it's a small space, and we don't really know how those populations will be affecting each other in the field. We also don't know how environmental factors will affect this relationship. And then most importantly for you guys, we don't know how having both of these species around will affect your crops, because really only spotted wing Drosophila has been studied fully. So my research is looking at 3 important questions. The first one is, does spotted wing Drosophila help the invasion of African fig fly in common berry fruits, or could the African fig fly invade on its own? Second, I'm looking at, does spotted wing Drosophila and African fig fly compete in those berries? So how are those populations interacting directly with each other? And then third, how does this interaction affect the crop? I'm only going to talk about my results from this first one because I only have results from this first one so far. So how is the spotted wing helping the African fig fly invade? But I'm currently doing research on the other 2 questions. So to test whether or not African fig fly can infest the crops on its own, we ran this experiment where we put female African fig flies in an individual cup with a piece of berry in it, or a whole berry in it, actually, for 24 hours just to see if they would lay eggs, and then we reared out those eggs to see if they would develop. We did this in blueberries, blackberries, and raspberries, and we had different stages of ripeness. So we had ripe, unripe, and overripe fruit. We also had different types of damage. So berries were either undamaged, so completely whole, damaged by a cut made with a razor, or damaged by spotted wing Drosophila. Okay, so I'm going to get into my results here. Just to explain this graph real quick, eggs, the number of eggs laid in the fruit is going to be on this y-axis here. And then on the x-axis, we're going to have overripe, ripe, and underripe berries. And then the bars are going to be different colors, which is going to represent cut, spotted wing Drosophila damage, or uncut berries. So looking at it immediately, one of the things you may first notice is that the underripe fruit here, almost no eggs were laid. So African fig fly, unlike spotted wing Drosophila, is not going after underripe fruit for blueberries. And then looking further at the overripe and ripe fruit, we see that the uncut fruit also, again, has almost no eggs laid. So in this case, we see that the spotted wing damage and the cut is really helping the African fig fly get into these fruit. This means that there's a very low likelihood that African fig fly will infest the fruit without spotted wing Drosophila already being present. However, when we look at our results from raspberries and blackberries, we see a very different thing. So on this graph, we just are looking at blackberries, but raspberries was very similar in that we see right away the underripe is having eggs laid on it. So they are attracted to the underripe fruit of raspberries and blackberries. And we see in all stages that the cut, the spotted wing damage, and the undamaged is all kind of the same. So African fig fly can lay eggs without spotted wing Drosophila there, and will lay eggs about to the same extent. And what we found actually looking at these under a microscope is that they're using the crevices in raspberries and blackberries to lay their eggs in between them, and also that they can lay eggs directly into sun damaged spots or like other types of soft spots in raspberries. So this means that it could become a pest without the presence of spotted wing, and it has the potential to become a secondary pest after control of spotted wing. So if you spray for something that works for spotted wing, but not for African fig fly, you could have the African fig fly coming in afterwards and actually being a pest on its own. And here is just some pictures of them laying the eggs directly into the fruit itself. So on this one with the 2 stars, you can kind of see the eggs being laid in between the crevices of the drupals of the fruit. And on this one, this lighter color of the blackberry is a sun damaged spot, and you can see that the eggs are being laid just directly into the skin there. So there's still a lot of questions to be answered, mainly like what it means for your crops and how you should manage for both of them. Well, we do know that some things will work for both, so I'm going to go over those. First of all, monitoring. It's important to monitor for these pests so you know when you need to start treating them. And a cup abated with apple cider vinegar and a drop of unscented dish soap will attract both flies. And these traps can be placed around the crop or in the wooded edges of the farm. I recommend putting them in the wooded edges of the farm because you'll catch them there before you'll start catching them in your crop. So you'll know when they're in the area before you actually need to start treating them for your crop. Also, I'll be trapping and monitoring populations next year in 2024. So if you are a grower growing blackberries and raspberries in particular and want to be involved, you can take a screenshot of my email. Please contact me. I'll have that later in the presentation as well too. So there's also a lot of cultural controls that will work for both flies. Ryan Kusel was a PhD student in the department who graduated last year, who did a lot of work with fine mesh netting. And this can go over the crops after pollination, and it really reduced the amount of Drosophila, spotted wing Drosophila that was in the crop. And that will also work for African fig fly as it's a larger fly. So anything that's excluding spotted wing will also be excluding African fig fly. Sanitation. So you want to pick your fruit as soon as it's ripe, as overripe fruit is actually going to attract more flies of both species. Both species are more attracted to the smells and odors coming off overripe fruit. So if you remove those, you're going to have a less attractive field plot to the flies. And then inspection. So berries with larvae in them will be soft and misshapen. You can kind of notice that when you're picking them. However, if there's eggs in there that haven't hatched yet, you probably won't be able to tell unless you look under a microscope. Refrigeration. If you refrigerate the berries, it will stop any development of the eggs or larvae. However, once you move it from refrigeration, they will continue growing. So if you want to actually kill the eggs and larvae, you can put them in the freezer if that's an option. And then finally, removal of wild hosts. So a lot of my other work is on overwintering of spotted wing Drosophila, and I found that honeysuckle and pokeweed are two very important late season hosts in Kentucky. So removing those from your surrounding areas or from your wooded edge may help reduce the numbers of the spotted wing. And then finally, you can use chemical controls. So these aren't very well studied for African fig fly, but there are many that will probably affect both. And you can find this list on an Entvect 230. But unfortunately for spotted wing, spraying needs to be administered before egg laying because once it's in the fruit, it's actually protected from the spray. And it needs to be high volumes of weekly spray so you can actually get the flies that are living within the foliage. Also, it's important when using any insecticide to rotate modes of action. So you want to reduce the chances of gaining resistance in the populations of flies. Also, again, it needs to really be looked into further, but some studies show that chemicals could affect each species differently. For example, one of the only ones out there that has looked at African fig fly and pesticides shows that insecticidal baits are less effective for African fig fly compared to the spotted wing Drosophila. With that, I'll take any questions. Again, if you want to be involved or you just have any questions later on, you can contact me on my email there. And thanks to my lab and the farms who have helped me out so far. Yeah, any questions?